Yesterday, the U.S. President Donald Trump signed an official decree recognizing Israel's sovereignty over Golan Heights. Let's take a look at the signing ceremony.
In a moment, I will sign a presidential proclamation recognizing Israel's sovereign right over the Golan Heights. The state of Israel took control of the Golan Heights in 1967.
The United States President Donald Trump has stamped his signature on yet another scandalous issue. The U.S. leader signed a proclamation recognizing the Golan Heights as Israeli territory.
And today I am taking historic action to promote Israel's ability to defend itself and really to have a very powerful, very strong national security, which they're entitled to have.
Israel occupied the geostrategic Golan Heights during the 1967 Middle East War.
Under my administration, the unbreakable alliance between the United States and Israel has never been stronger.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed Trump for his decision regarding Golan Heights, saying that Israel has never had a better friend.
Mr. President, you've done it not once, but twice, with your bold proclamation on Jerusalem and with your bold proclamation today on the Golan.
The U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, earlier claimed that God may have sent Donald Trump to save Israel from Iran.
Today, aggressive action by Iran and terrorist groups in southern Syria, including Hezbollah, continue to make the Golan Heights a potential launching ground for attacks against Israel, very violent attacks.
Welcome back, and joining me now to discuss this further is Mark Tomass from Harvard University. Professor Tomass, thank you very much for being with us. Let me start by asking you, now, when I took you earlier on the program, you mentioned that Golan Heights is of utmost importance, and now when we see this controversial decision of the United States recognizing Israel's sovereignty over Golan Heights, tell me, what is your navigation through this decision?
If you recall, Jafar, when we spoke about it, it was a few months ago, I said part of the aim of the United States being in eastern Euphrates was to weaken Syria, and weaken Syria to a degree where it would come to a point where it will acknowledge the sovereignty of Israel over the Golan Heights, to give it up, in other words. Now that at least Donald Trump decided to go out of Syria, at least said that in the beginning, but then he faced opposition, and then he changed his mind. He compromised to bring the troops down to 400. But the point is that he wanted to show Israel that its security is the utmost in his mind, and therefore any withdrawal from Syria, any U.S. withdrawal from Syria, will be rewarded, will be compensated by this recognition. So to analyze the situation after the recognition, we have to look at it from different perspectives. Let's look at it first from the U.S. perspective, second from the Israeli perspective, and third from the Syrian perspective. From the U.S. perspective, is a Trump move. It's a master move where he was able to bring about a result that would be preferable for him in the elections, for his re-election bid. So what he achieved with this is he showed that he is the most trusted ally of Israel compared to all of the American presidents in the past, because he made two promises and he delivered on these promises. First, moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and second, acknowledging the Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. So by this, he can show that that he means what he says. He's a strong leader, and he is so pro-Israel. So he can, in this sense, he can have all of the intellectuals who are in the United States, the pro-Israeli intellectuals, which are most of the intellectuals, who will back him up. Who will back him up not only in terms of the intellectual power that they will put in during the election, but also in case any charges were brought against him, any charges of obstruction of justice were brought against him as a result of the release of the Mueller report. So for him, it's a very smart move, and it was done in the right time, at the time where Syria is the weakest, where it is the government is weakest. The people are suffering, and they have no let's say patience or desire at this time to engage in any conflict with Israel over the Golan Heights. So that's from the U.S. side. From the Israeli side, Israel has the initial plan of Israel after occupying the Golan Heights, along with the West Bank and the Sinai, was to hold on these territories and exchange them for recognition of Israel. The plan was that because the Arabs did not recognize Israel, so what we do is we take the land, we keep it as long as possible, and then we exchange it for recognition. Now that worked regarding Sinai, because they didn't feel very strongly about Sinai, but the Israelis didn't really want to abandon the West Bank or the Golan Heights, and that was clear during the Camp David negotiations. During the Camp David negotiations, the Israelis showed that they are not interested in giving up either the Golan or the West Bank. And because of that, as we know, that the settlement activities kept on going and intensified. So if you are planning to give it up, then you wouldn't probably invest so much in settlement activity. So Israel, in other words, preferred to keep the land over having peace. I mean, if Israel can have, it wants to have both. It wants to have peace and it wants to have the land. But if it has a choice between either this or that, it shows that it prefers to keep the land at the expense of peace. Now, from the Syrian side, at least from the Syrian and the Arab side in general, or maybe the Muslim world at large, this was a final blow for U.S. diplomacy. In other words, it's Trump drives the final nail in the coffin of U.S. diplomacy when it comes to the Arab-Israeli conflict, because after now, the U.S. will have no leverage, no political, diplomatic leverage apart from a military power, to have any influence in any future talks or any future negotiations between the Arabs and the Israelis. And actually, there is no grounds for any negotiations after now, especially not with Israel and all of the axis that is supporting Israel. Not with Syria and all of the axis that is supporting Syria. So this brings us a bit closer to, let's say, one step away from peace and one step closer to war. What shape that war will take, I don't know. This would be a big question. It all depends on the future.
Let's hope not. But Professor, another important question I would like to ask you. Now, you have lived in Syria yourself. Tell me, what is the significance of Golan Heights?
People feel that it is part of their country. They have been, they grew up knowing that this is part of their country, but they also grew up by being exposed to the frequent Arab-Israeli wars. The state propaganda apparatus has always said to the people that Israel is an expansionist entity. It's an expansionist entity, so it's not going to stop. In the schools, I remember they used to show us Israel in 1948, then Israel in 1967, and then the invasion of Lebanon in 1982. So it shows that how Israel was expanding. Now, most people didn't believe that up until the invasion of southern Lebanon. But after that, I think people have been convinced that the conflict with Israel is a serious one, and it is a pivotal one. It's more like a conflict over land that is not going to end. So people, regardless of who you are going to talk about, whether they are pro-regime or anti-regime, they don't feel good about this move. Almost all Syrians, actually, they would like to have the Golan Heights back, including the people who are living there. Incidentally, there were more than 100,000 that fled the area of the Golan Heights during the Israeli invasion, and those people were not allowed to return. So the remaining people who are living there, the Druze that you mentioned, have been there since the beginning. So they didn't leave. So there are refugees who would want to go back to their homes, but they haven't been able to, and then they have children and grandchildren and so on. So let me go back a bit from the Israeli perspective, because when we heard Benjamin Netanyahu speak in the White House, he mentioned two things. He spoke about the significance of the Golan Heights as a military strategic dam against any Syrian invasion. But he also spoke about the Israeli historical right in the Golan Heights. He said that the Golan Heights has been Israeli for thousands of years. So really, it is hard to know whether the strategic location of the Golan Heights is important, or it is because of its historical significance as a biblical or alleged biblical territory that belongs to Israel. So you can see from his speech that the Golan Heights has a strong position in the hearts of Israelis and all the people who support Israel, including the Christian fundamentalists in the United States. So I think to talk about the military significance is not persuasive, at least not persuasive to me, because during the 1973 war, the Syrian army was able to liberate much of the southern part of the Golan Heights, and the Syrian soldiers were reported that to have been washing their feet in the Sea of Galilee, otherwise known as Lake Tiberias. So the idea that because it is a mountain and it is a dam, that didn't stop the Syrian army from going in. And moreover, from now on, any war is going to be based on a missile war. So being a mountain or not, I think that would be of little significance.
Professor, now
so regarding
2 important points here. Middle East has been in turmoil for a very long time now. Tell me what kind of impact this decision could have on the Middle East and the Syrian peace process. And number 2, what does this unilateral decision of Donald Trump say about the current political landscape of the world when one man decides who gets the ownership of any land?
Well, it doesn't have anything positive to say about the peace process. To start with, there is no peace process. There is no peace process with Syria. There is no peace process with the Palestinians. This is more of a media concoction, probably not only a media, but also a political concoction, so that people will get busy by speaking about the peace process instead of speaking about a war or an ongoing war that has started a long time ago. I mean, talk about the deal of the century and all of that, all of these rumors that we hear. I mean, in the light of what has happened, you cannot even think about any deal that would satisfy the Arab side of this conflict. So I think we can put the peace process aside. We don't have to keep on talking about it and do a service to the people who are trying to fool everybody. On the other side, I don't really think this is just an individual decision made by Trump. I think this is Trump plus the Republican Party plus the Christian evangelical fundamentalist community in the United States. It's not just something that Trump has thought about and then tweeted about it. I think this must have been in the process for a long time. President Trump has, there has been legislation introduced in Congress, and before that there were people lobbying for about a year to have the United States recognize the Golan Heights as Israeli territory, and there was a proposal submitted by Ted Cruz and Gallagher about for the Congress to deliberate on the recognition. This was 2 to 3 weeks ago. So that what Donald Trump does in this case, he supports that move, and what he wants to do further, he wants to monopolize the pro-Israeli position to the United States for the Republicans. So the Republicans will take that pro-Israeli position and claim that this is theirs, and they are the most pro-Israelis in the United States as compared with the Democrats. And if you actually notice in the past week, he has been talking about the Democrats being anti-Israeli, and actually he says anti-Jewish. He says, frankly, I think they are anti-Jewish. In other words, he is attacking the Democrats and framing them as being anti-Semitic. And this is not only him, as I said, it's a concerted effort by the Republicans to demonize the Democrats. I'm saying that, and I'm not a Democrat, but just to tell you that, just observing what's happening. For example, there was a list that I saw on TV. This is before he mentioned. He said that the Democrats are anti-Jewish. Before he said that, I saw a long list of people, of congressmen who have been dubbed as anti-Semitic, including, by the way, Bernie Sanders, who is Jewish. So there is. This is not only him, and I'm saying this is really a plan. This is a plan of how to win the 2020 elections.
And it seems like the plan of the Republican Party now. Professor, it is quite clear that this move of the United States and the U.S. President Donald Trump will definitely play a role for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in seeking a fifth term. But would it also play a similar role for the U.S. President Donald Trump in seeking a second term?
I think it will be very good for him. I mean, this is a master strike on his behalf because it was the best time that he could choose. There is no better time than this. So I think it would work very well for him. First, he will show that he's the most pro-Israeli. Second, he will show that he's most anti-Iran, because the entire process of recognizing the sovereignty has been put in the context of an anti-Iranian move. Forgetting the fact that Iran entered Syria, or was invited to enter Syria after the Syrian government was challenged by so many rebel groups that were supported by the United States, by the presidency of Barack Obama. So the notion that they are doing this because of Iran, it's not persuasive. At least it doesn't persuade me. And they are doing it because it is good for the Republican Party at this moment, and because it's good for Israel.
Professor Mark Tomass, thank you very much for talking to us on A News.
Thank you, Jafar.